Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with perfect potato salad. That's right, I'm going to show you what I think is the best way to make perfect potato salad, which, by the way, should not be confused with the perfect way to make the best potato salad, since who even knows what that means? So what I'm hoping to do here is just simply show you the best methods and practices, and possibly techniques, for making a potato salad that's going to be perfect. And by perfect, of course we mean perfect for you. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the first huge tip, and that would be to boil the potatoes whole with the skin on. And for me, the best choice is 4 very large russet potatoes. These are roughly about 12 ounces each. And since we are going to cook these whole, it's very important to try to get ones that are the same size. Okay, so ignore those dirty looks at the market. I want you to go through that whole bin and find 4 potatoes that are the same weight and shape. And then above and beyond selection, another super important factor here is that we cook these in heavily salted water. Yes, that heavily salted. So believe it or not, that was a 1/4 cup of kosher salt, which may look like a crazy amount, but that really is how much we need. And then what we'll do is go ahead and cover these in some nice fresh cold water. And yes, in case you're wondering, this technique's going to work with any variety of potato. It just won't be as good. Okay, when I'm making a salad, I want a potato that has a starchy, absorbent texture, and not something that's firm and waxy. So that's why the russet's my top choice, followed by, I guess, Yukon Gold. But anyway, no matter what you're using, what we'll do is bring that up to a boil over high heat, at which point we'll reduce our heat to medium-low to maintain a nice steady simmer. And then all we're going to do is simply cook those potatoes until they're tender, which I believe took me about 40 minutes or so. But of course that's going to depend on the size. So instead of going by time, what we'll do is test these. And for this, I'll use this metal skewer, and we'll test those by giving them the old poka-poka. And I'm happy to report mine were perfect. Not firm, not soft and mushy, but just perfectly tender. And then what we're going to do once we've determined our potatoes have cooked long enough is go ahead and transfer those to a plate, because the next step may be the most important. And that's letting these cool down to room temp before we work with them. All right, we never want to dress hot potatoes with a mayonnaise-based dressing, since we may end up with something that looks greasy and unappetizing. Having said that, working with cold refrigerated potatoes isn't great either. So letting these cool down to room temp is ideal. So we'll simply move those off the stove and maybe in front of an open window, and we'll let those cool completely. And while we're waiting, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and mix up our dressing, which, as I mentioned, and as you can see, is mayonnaise-based. And real mayonnaise, please. I mean, you can use fat-free mayonnaise, just not for potato salad. And then to that, we will add some apple cider vinegar, or of course the vinegar of your choice. And then we'll also toss in a couple spoons of mustard. I'm going with Dijon, but just some good old-fashioned American yellow mustard will work. And then we will finish this up by seasoning with some salt, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. And then last but not least, a little bit of cayenne. And that's going to be it for this very simple dressing. We'll go ahead and grab our whisk and give that a mix. And as soon as that's all combined, it's ready to use with our potatoes, assuming that they're room temp. Okay, if you only remember one thing from this video, besides cooking the potatoes whole with a lot of salt, it's that we don't want to use this dressing on the potatoes if they're still warm or hot. So if you happen to finish this dressing and your potatoes are still cooling, just simply transfer it into the fridge. And then what we'll do once our potatoes are room temp is peel them by simply scraping off the skin, which is not only going to be really easy, we're also going to waste like 0 amount of potato. And then just one little heads up, since we did cook these with the skin on, there's going to be a little bit of discoloration under the skin, which really affects nothing. It's just an appearance thing. So once we've removed the skin, if there's a few dark spots you want to scrape off, or a couple little eyes or whatever to clean up, go ahead. And then what we'll do once these are peeled is cut them up into pieces roughly 3 times the size that we want the pieces of potato in our salad to be at the end. And that might have been confusing. So let me say that again, in hopefully a less confusing way. Since these potatoes are going to break up as we mix our salad together, I don't like to start off by cutting these up too small. All right, so my theory is whatever size we cut them up at this point, they're going to be like a third or a quarter of this size by the time the salad's done. And yes, it absolutely helps if you throw your pinky out while you're doing this. It acts as a counterbalance and also looks quite elegant. And then once our potatoes are cut, we'll transfer those into a large mixing bowl, at which point we can proceed to final assembly. Again, assuming that these are room temp. And if they're not, let them cool more. But mine were good, so I'm going to proceed with the rest of the ingredients, which for me is going to start with a little touch of finely diced sweet onion. And by the way, onion's a controversial ingredient, so I'm going to spend an entire paragraph about that in the blog post. So the onion's optional, but the rest of these ingredients are not. So we're definitely going to want to toss in some diced celery, as well as some freshly chopped Italian parsley. And then we'll also toss in some chopped hard-boiled egg, which I will not be chopping up, but rather using one of these slicers. So we'll slice it one way and then the other. And I guess if you wanted, you could turn it on its side and cut it a third time. But I don't, because just like the potato, these are going to break up as we mix. Speaking of which, once we've added the last of our ingredients, I like to take a big spoon and give this a mix before I add the dressing, which, to be completely honest, may be an unnecessary step. All right, I really don't know if this comes out any better than if we had just thrown the dressing in now. But none of that matters to me because it feels right. And above and beyond giving these ingredients a little bit of a head start getting combined, I'm also able to start breaking up these potatoes without being distracted by the dressing. Okay, so we'll give that a quick stir, kind of breaking up those bigger pieces of potato as we do. At which point, finally, we can add our dressing and continue mixing. Oh, and by the way, if you happen to be thinking to yourself, as soon as this is mixed up, I bet we can eat. Well, no. I have some very disappointing news. Unfortunately, there's no way to properly finish seasoning this and checking the texture until it's thoroughly chilled. So go ahead and taste it if you want, but we're just not going to get an accurate reading if this is room temp. So what we'll do after we mix that up is cover it with some plastic and transfer it in the fridge for at least 2 or 3 hours or until thoroughly chilled. So that's what I did. And a few hours later, mine looked like this. Speaking of which, this always looks terrible until you mix it up again. So relax, it gets better. And what we'll do is grab a fork and give it a taste. And we're checking for 2 things. Does it need more salt? Which it always does. So I'm going to toss them in. And then also we're determining, does it need a little more mayonnaise? So if it seems a little bit dry, I like to throw another spoon in, which I almost always do. And then we'll go ahead and give that a mix, and we'll give it one final taste. And one thing I should have mentioned by now, because this video is mostly focusing on techniques and methods, don't think you have to use all the ingredients I used, or only the ingredients I used. Okay, as long as you use the proper techniques, you can add anything you want to this. You know, things like pickles and peppers, stuff like that. Okay, so when it comes to the ingredients, it's up to you to determine what makes your potato salad valid. And if you like it, pretty much anything goes. But anyway, once that's all set, we'll go ahead and transfer that into something slightly more attractive. And maybe finish with a little bit of fresh chive. And then because every potato salad I ever made in every cafeteria and deli I ever worked was always garnished with a little bit of paprika on top, I'm going to do the same, except with cayenne. And that's it. That is now officially ready to enjoy at your picnic or cookout. Except I don't have one of those on the schedule. So I'm just going to eat mine standing in the kitchen, which is fine. And of course, normally at this point, I would brag about how good it tastes. But like I said, this was just outlining the method, and I'm not exactly sure what you're going to put in yours. But having said that, if you do use the same ingredients, this comes out really good, and for me is like the epitome of a classic American potato salad, which I learned from my mother, Pauline. May she rest in peace. Which reminds me, if you're one of these super fans working on the trivia game, potato salad is the first food I can remember eating. Apparently, it was one of my favorite and first baby foods. So whether you have a picnic coming up, or maybe just some hungry babies around, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.